as everybody knows several times now, I'm Brenda. Brenda Romero. It's hugely intimidating and exciting to be speaking at the U.S. Embassy. And as you guys are introducing me, and I'm having this realization, it's something that's happening in my head where I think, how is it that this kid from Ogdensburg, New York, is speaking at the U.S. Embassy in Dublin, Ireland, and people are, hopefully you're here for something more than the free drinks. So I'm going to try to live up to that. Anyway, there are free drinks, so apparently I've already lived up to it. And so I'm just thinking about that and how far we've already come as games, right? So if we just go way back to the age of 14, I'm familiar with the term THACO. Does anybody else know what that term means? Yes, you are my friend. So are you. There's the super geeks have just identified themselves. So it's 2-hit armor class 0 coming from D&D. And I don't have a lot of friends because I'm a 14-year-old girl and I really like Dungeons and Dragons and I like to play games. And when am I going to get a real job? And the great news is I've still failed to get one. I am a game designer. I've never been anything but a game designer. Eventually, instead of just making games, I got paid by universities to talk about making games and to teach people how to make games. And then eventually I became a chair of a department. And then I got paid to help other people teach other people how to make games. But the absolute consistent passion for me is that I deeply, passionately love games. And if I talk about it too much, I can actually choke myself up. That's how strongly I feel about games. It's a crazy thing to feel that strongly about, but I'm sure some of you feel very strongly about, say, a really great steak or a really great pint. If you multiply that by 10,000, maybe you have how I feel about games. It's literally all I've done my entire life. Being here in Ireland is very wonderful for me because not only am I a game developer, so this merges all these different things. Not only am I a game developer, and not only am I an educator, but I'm also the great-granddaughter of Patty Donovan from the Western County Court. So, I think about myself as a kid, if I heard that at 14 I'm going to be doing this, and that people are taking games that seriously, and the power of games that seriously, not just as an economic force, which we are. I think about all the different films and TV shows that are filmed in Ireland. And games industry right now, we are bigger than film. We are the leading form of entertainment. Eventually, it will be our IP that is put on lunchboxes and not us just making movies about other people's IP. So we are the leading form of entertainment. We are also the leading form of education. As a professor, how many educators are in the room? Oh, wow. Okay, so you know this face. Hold on, you're teaching and this is the face. Right, you know this. Oh, wait, it wouldn't be that. They take out their iPhone, right? I just showed my age there. They take out their iPhone and they look. And so that face, I think about those kids who they're not interested really in learning what I have to say, even if I'm talking about games, for goodness sakes, but that same kid will level to level 90 in World of Warcraft without a problem. And to get to level 90, one of my daughter's greatest achievements was at the age of level 12, she started her own guild without us. We didn't have to make her do that. She took a leadership role in a game world and got a whole guild together with 100 different people at the age of 12. And I believe at the age of 12, I had succeeded in orchestrating a group of people who would play tag or something like that, So I was really impressed that she was doing this. World of Warcraft is somewhat complex math. She met people from other countries. It was an amazing experience. She learned about world leaders from civilization. And I'm not saying games are perfect for teaching. But what I am saying is, as an educator, I'm fascinated why the same kid who won't pay attention for more than 15 minutes to me will pay attention for 8 hours to World of Warcraft. And there's two approaches I can take to it. I can say, I can't stand WoW and I hate video games. Or I can say, I need to find out what they're doing. I need to figure out what's in there that's holding people. And that, fortunately, is happening. There's a huge uprising in STEM games now. And I'm thrilled to see that the United States government and the Irish government are taking that opportunity seriously. And when I think about the future, so they've asked me to say a few words about the future of game education in Ireland. The very first thing is me. I'm the one who needs to be educated about games and game development and game education in Ireland. The development community already, the game developers have already reached out to me, and I posted a few questions on a couple private groups and I've already gotten lots and lots of answers. And so if you are one of those people, it's just I'm easy to find, Brenda@romero.com. That's just my name. And if that's too much, it's just @BR on Twitter or on Facebook. What are the problems you're facing? What are the opportunities you see? As somebody who makes games for a living and who feels called to make games, I want to help and I want to hear what opportunities you see here. If you're a game educator and you've got exciting challenges and issues or things you're proud of, please let me know about those too. I'm the one who needs to be educated. And then I would say the next phase of it is when I look at the courses in the schools that are here. When I was coming up and going to school, getting a games education, I mean, I guess you did that the way I did it. I was lucky, I got into a game company when I was 15, somehow, and succeeded in just staying. And I have this bizarre distinction of being the longest continuously serving woman in games, which sounds impressive until you realize I basically failed to die. So as long as I keep living and don't change careers, I get to keep that honor, which is a weird honor to have, but nonetheless, there it is. So I think about the schools and the schools and the courses that they're offering. There's a unique challenge in game education, and that game developers, especially the platform developers, the people who are making the Xboxes and the PS3, the PS4s, the iPhones, and all the different devices the games are played on, they're 2 years or 3 years in the future. Game developers are 2 years in the future. Today, we're playing the games that they were working on 2 years ago. And then schools, because of the length of time it takes to get curriculum through, maybe another 2 years in the past. And this is a problem that we face in the States too. How do we keep that, how do we close that gap so we're not teaching stuff that's already 2 years old? And then I would say there's an interesting bit of education that needs to happen culturally. And this is, the stuff that I'm saying is just coming from the incoming information bomb that I've gotten over the last few days. It's a happy bomb, it's not a bad bomb. That helping people to understand that games aren't just a trivial pursuit of, wait, that was the stupidest thing I've ever said. Games and there is a game called Trivial Pursuit. The games aren't just something, they're not just experimentation. They are multi-million-dollar vehicles of commerce. I personally know and have married people who, married people? No. My husband doesn't have two personalities, but I'm married to someone who did very well in games. And there's lots of opportunity to be made there. He comes from, he doesn't come from a point of privilege, neither do I. We came from poor families. He was he talks about this quite a bit. He was his father, he came from a very poor background, a single parent family, lots of alcoholism in his family, but he learned how to code and he got himself up and out. And that's the story of a lot of game developers. So it is an agnostic form of technology that I believe can bring a lot of people to a good position. So I think it's helping people learn that games are a very valid and successful form of enterprise, but also they are a beautiful art form. I've made 2 games so far that are in museums right now, not something I ever thought would happen. But even the MoMA has a game exhibition. The National Museum of Play in the United States has an exhibit of some of the earliest versions of D&D, handwritten, some of the notes that were Dungeons and Dragons. And other things, like they just put John's computer next to Bill Budge's computer. You have to be a super geek to even know what I'm talking about with Bill Budge, but he was a pinball construction set. Anyway, just to have these things and to see these things on display, like they are actual forms of art, I think is important. And games are forms of art. I mean, we will recognize that, I believe, in years to come. If not so much now, but we will see that later on. I know there's a lot of people who have warm, fuzzy feelings when they think about the first time they played Pong and the first time they played Pac-Man. So it is a form of media like books. There was a time when books were the newfangled thing, then TV and film and photograph, all of these things have to earn their place. And games sit at this very unique place where they are an educational medium, I mean an artistic medium, I mean a technological medium, and they are all of these things. In fact, when we came in, just because I'm very game-minded right now, I saw the Marine at the front desk, and the Marines used Doom for training way long ago, so games are even government-based. So I think there's tremendous opportunity here, and what I'm hoping to do is just take all of the information and all of the hope, because I would love to see this turn into something that is tremendously beneficial for enterprise, for art, for game developers, for education. And I'm incredibly impressed that that the combination of the institutions, the developers, the Fulbright Committee, and the governments have all come together to make this happen. I'm astounded that this is happening. If you had told me 10 years ago that that group of people would come together to try to make something great happen with games, I would not have believed you, particularly in the crazy censorship environment we sometimes find ourselves in. So I'm super honored that I was somehow magically picked to do this. And again, I welcome everybody to contact me. I'm easy to, don't call me, because don't call me, I'm super easy to find. Because my phone, I don't have an international plan yet, but it's just @BR on Twitter. I'm Brenda Romero, it's just the Brenda on Facebook, facebook.com/Brenda, or BrendaRomero.com. And if you want to get hold of both John and I, we're hiding in plain sight at us@Romero.com. And I guess that's it, thank you.
You know, that idea that game, you talk about that face that you get in the classroom, it's the same face that's not engaging in other ways. Have you had any experience with engagement games that worked, or you think have shown they work?
How do you mean, like what form of engagement and with whom?
Local government, on planning, some people are doing stuff on conflict resolution, on development.
So there's lots of, there are conflict resolution games, and I would say awareness games. Like there's a game called Papers, Please, which is about immigration, right? You know, so there's lots of game developers that are, I would say, making statements with games like that. And there are many games that have been games, probably 20 games that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there's many more, that try to teach peaceful negotiation skills. You could even argue that a game like Civilization, in which I had one of my most impactful gameplay experiences ever. I was playing as Gandhi, if you played Civilization, and I nuked Moscow. And I still feel guilty about nuking Moscow, especially because I was Gandhi. And the game designer, he had made, I don't know whether it was Sid Meier, I don't know whether he meant to make this point, but when I launched the nuke went up and it took its sweet time going over, and I had a lot of time for guilt to instill itself. So peaceful resolution, you know, you can do cultural victories where your culture is so great you win the game. And there's other games there's many games that just get rid of the entire war section. In fact, in the Iron Designer Challenge that I'll be giving at all various colleges, I'm not going to give it away, but there's a challenge all along those lines. And so, you know, it's going forward. For me, and for many people that grew up in the game generation, say, their means of exploring topics is through a game. And in that form of interactivity, why would I just want to write about it if I can make something interactive and you can experience it too? So we're seeing more and more of that, and I think it will be one of the predominant methods of making a point and education the further we go.
Brenda, David Sweeney from Games Ireland. Welcome to Ireland.
Thank you.
Great to have you here. We've been hearing a lot about you over the last few months as we look forward to your visit. So, can I ask you this gentleman's question? What's your initial impression of the Irish industry?
Well, and let me just say thank you for the welcome. And if I didn't say thank you, everybody, for the warm welcome. Yeah, the cab driver told me he asked me where my I swear I'll answer your question. I inherited the gift of gab from my grandfather, my great-grandfather. The cab driver asked about, you know, was I coming here to see family, did I have ties to my family? And I said, well, no, and I know Dunham's a really common name, you know, it's my great-grandfather, and so he says, you're going to Cork? And I said, yeah, I'll be going there. And he says, check the jails. So, so he was being funny, and I laughed. So, and it may be true, I have no idea. So there's no question any question is fine, really. So in the incoming that's happened, some things are really obvious to me, right? That games are stuck sort of in this uncomfortable space. They are this technological enterprise thing. So could we please have some help from the tech and enterprise side? Tech and enterprise is your art. go over to the art side. And then art says, well, okay, fine, we'll be an art, we'll be whatever we need to be, but could we please have some help and some funding? And then art says, you're a tech experiment, you're enterprise, you're too commercial, go over there. And that leaves games stuck in this uncomfortable situation. I would say also, I think that graduates coming out of the schools, especially with free universities, I feel like one of Ireland's biggest game exports is its educated students to the UK and to the United States. As far as I can tell, this is based on, so everything I'm saying, I want an asterisk after it with it, which is, I've had 2 days of incoming information, so I could just be making all of this up, right? I was talking to this one guy, I had lunch with him, and I asked, what's the starting salary for an engineer here? And he said it's about, I forget the conversion, but anyway, it's about 28,000 US. And immediately that made me want to start a company here. Immediately. Because the starting salary in San Francisco is $60,000 a year. And I know because I just graduated 8 students, and I know I run a company, I hire people. Senior coders, a really good senior coder is going to get about $140,000. So you ask me, see, I see the faces of some of you saying like, when I get home, I'm going to the States, right? and it's, so I think that's problematic, right? I don't think, I come from a rural farming community, and one of our biggest exports in northern New York is our intelligent people. And that doesn't have to be the case, because this is an incredible culture, and I learned my great-grandfather, Irish history was instilled, and I know it was the Gaelic Games. So you would think like the Gaelic Games were used to teach culture, yet people are having to export themselves to work in games. And maybe it's a trivial point, but it's an interesting one to me. So I think the salary issue is a problem because you cannot compete. You can't compete with that. And I don't know how that changes, because that's a pretty stark change, but the reality is it is a global economy. And right now, we have, in our company, the lead game designer in my current project is in New York. He's in New York City. And my lead programmer is in Santa Clara. And those two are working together. I can have a lead coder or a lead programmer anywhere, a lead coder or a lead designer anywhere I want. I prefer to have them all in one place. And speaking of place, it's an incubation space, but not just an incubation space, because if I picked a group of people from every one of the colleges I'm going to go visit and I just plop them into offices, those people are as good as their experience. They're as good as the experience around them. So it's, since people are leaving, the game industry veterans, in my life I'm very blessed to have worked with a lot of people over the years. You didn't know this was going to be a second lecture, did you? I'm very blessed to have worked with a lot of people. So, I'll contact Harvey Smith, who worked on Dishonored. Dear friend of mine, he's in Leo, if I've got game development questions. My husband is now on his 11th game industry startup. I've got biz questions, I ask him. If I want somebody to just give me ridiculously direct answers, George Broussard, buddy of mine, I've known him for years. Another game designer friend of mine, I'll contact David Goldfarb. So I've worked in the industry for a long time and I know people. But having those mentors that you look to for one thing or another is incredibly important, and building that mentor culture means you need to have those companies here where you have the veterans. This sounds like a setup, but it's working well. So speaking of veterans, I'll try to stick with the pattern. Speaking of veterans, I've contacted multiple Irish game developers who I know are working at big companies and asking them why they're not here and why they left Ireland in the first place. And so I've spoken to 3 people, and I'm expecting, hopefully the others will get back to me. If not, I'll ping them again, I'm here. And the reason is because they didn't have a company that came out of school, and they didn't have a company to come into. They didn't have that mid-level junior position to come in. And you could say, well, why can't, they're just small games, why can't they go do that? I don't think anybody would think it reasonable if somebody who just came out of a culinary school said, that's it, I'm opening a restaurant tomorrow. Like, whoa, slow down, Kingpin, you're not opening anything, here's Japan, right? And so it's the same way in the game industry. I find, even having spent 30 years in the game industry, in the business space, there's stuff I'm still learning. And games are, last night and this morning I was having a conversation with my husband about just this accounts receivable issue, which is it's good to have a problem with receivables. So we have an accounts receivable problem, somebody owes us for some development work. And how would I handle that? How should we handle that? And he had a solution, and I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And that's because he's founded 11 companies, and I'm on my 2nd. right? In my first one, I stupidly sold too quick and made $5,000 and that was the end of the entire company. So don't listen to me when it comes to that certain phase. But he, having that mentor network, I think is really important. So incubation space, pay, thinking about. The one thing that's great that is here, so I will say this, I think it's very easy to say like, there's not this and there's not, and this isn't happening. And then people don't care, or all these other things. And I'm not hearing a lot of negativity. What I'm hearing is a profound amount of passion, which is so incredibly important. If that were missing, then there's like problems, right? So we have a bunch of people who really don't want to make games. Awesome. I'm going to go home now, right? But I'm hearing just an overwhelming amount of passion from people who just want to make games and want to be successful at the games that they're making. They want to be represented at conferences like Gamescom, like GDC, and see, like I know Scotland has a booth there, I've seen Germany have a booth there, and I've seen Australia. So they want to see that level of representation as well. Another thing too is game conferences. Everything happens not everything, but when you go to a game conference, lots of stuff happens. You get contacts, you get opportunities for consulting, many things. But for the average game developer in Ireland, that starting game developer, it's going to cost them 20% of their yearly salary to get to GDC. And that's impossible. There's just no way. So anyway, that's the current dump of my the hard drive in my head. That's what I've gotten, and that's my last 24 hours. I hope I was not wrong about everything. But if I was, come up to me and let me know, please. I'm a game developer. I'm used to being criticized. I can handle Twitter. I can handle you. Yes.
Chris Sexton, University of America. I'm really interested in hearing it. Maybe it's something you can't answer here, but I'm interested to hear what way should courses be structured? And you mentioned that games, there's a technological aspect to it, there's an artistic aspect. Do you think this should be in one course? Should you have? Can you mix this?
Well, so you can mix it, right? I mean, you can offer a generalist degree. You can do that. I don't know that generalist will get a job. Nowadays, I'm doing a survey, and I'll be doing these for all of them. And if you are an educator and you're like, hey, I'm curious, I'd like to know the answer to this question, let me know, because I asked a question of the programming community. And I just asked them what language they thought was most important for students to learn. And the answer was overwhelmingly C++, which wasn't a surprise to me, right? But I just wanted to know. And so I'm going to ask similar questions. What's the #1 skill a game designer should have to make for the program? I've had experience working in different types of programs. And the more specific you can get, the more information you can give a student, the more industry structured you can make your course, the better success I've had in getting people hired. Which at the end of the day, like I don't care how many students come in, because I could start a program tomorrow for $100 and get 100,000 students in the door. But how many of those students are actually getting hired? And so those people who are incredibly trained to do things are the ones that are getting jobs. The game industry, speaking of coders, I mean, this is the area I'm focused on right now, but I will be moving to art and design soon. The coders, it's learning C++. They want to see evidence that you have made that you are making games. And even one of the things I thought was interesting, I have a student who, if left to his own devices, will try to program his own game engine. And we sort of joke about this quite a bit. Like, you're going to get to the end of the game, the end of the entire program, and you're going to have a game engine, but no actual game inside of the game. You'll like walk around toward nothing to do nothing. And so we were joking about that. But we went to Obsidian, and Obsidian said, which is a really successful game company, that should be the #1 bullet point on your resume. And so I'm going all over the place, but specifics. Train a game designer, and I'm in the various universities that I'll be visiting, and I'm assuming this information will be public after. I'm thinking about interviewing lots of different game educators, lots of different game industry people, and what would a good track look like? What are those skills? Like I know there's some courses like we teach game system architecture or system architecture in code, but do we teach system design to game designers? Because I spend my days in Excel spreadsheets as a system designer. And that's something that's very rarely taught. But the people who have that knowledge get jobs.
I think what you said earlier is really true. I mean, one of the things about our course is one of the really transferable skills, or at least in-demand skills in Ireland, is programming, is C++.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a constant sort of sway between how much of the game-specific modules you put in and how much of the more generic transferable programming type skills that you put in the course. We don't, I mean, you're right, I don't think we have an industry that most of my students, they all get jobs, there's lots of jobs out there, but I wouldn't say most of them, or even less than a quarter probably finish up in the games industry. They all finish up in various other industries by virtue of their software skills. So that's a hard hurdle to leap.
Yeah, and it's a question too. Can you take a game course and put programming inside of it, so that in some way they're always improving their code, they're always doing that. And I would say when John is he had to go back to graduate students. I think he's on a plane now. Anyway, he'll be back here tomorrow, and he's going to be with me for most of this. So he will either be in the building with his computer. He's making a game while he's here because that's what he does. So anyway, but he'll be happy. He will talk about code until he drops dead. So feel free to ask him any questions. He has very strong opinions on C++. And if you know how to code in 6502 assembler, he will talk to you for the rest of your life. Big fan.
Sergio from Valferma College. More on the design side of things, I guess art, coding, there's this designer figure in the middle that creates new experiences of gaming. Over the years, rapid prototyping, game documentation, spreadsheet, Excel, is there a language of game design that you have learned to communicate to other members of the team, be it coders and graphic designers, that you can communicate what the character should do, what the game should be about, the game mechanics? Is there a design language for games that is mature, that is teachable? What is it?
You know, that question is, the answer is yes, of course not. And the reason I say it is I'm arguing with myself as I'm having this discussion, as you're asking the question. So there are standard ways of doing things. But you know, for instance, I see Owen here, and I know Owen's working on a game. Does your game have documentation? Okay, so I guarantee you that Owen's way of documenting something is different than my way of documenting something. Guarantee you. And I know that if somebody works with, do you have a junior designer working with you?
There's 2 of us working.
Okay, so there's 2 of you working on it, and let's just say that something goes tragically right. That doesn't make any sense. I was going to say wrong. Something goes amazingly well, and you guys end up growing. So now you're working on 2 projects, and you've got a couple juniors working on a game, and which is the type of that's exactly what we want to see in Ireland. So you get the people coming out of college, and they've got someone to catch them now. So this junior is going to learn from you how to do it. And so there are some generalities. And but knowing the first thing you do when you go to a company is you say, what's the method of doing this here? And then you know how to write clear, succinct design documentation. Knowing what companies expect. When, for instance, when I applied for Blizzard, they gave me one section of the game and told me to write the design document for it. I mean, it was a section that already existed. But what will be expected of you when you get out there? How I teach when I'm talking about game design, game documentation. Maybe I'll talk more about this. I mean, not right now, obviously, because these people are not in class and would leave. So,
I guess the personal experience. What do you find more useful to communicate design to people?
What I say, so what I tell people, this is really what I tell my students the very first day. I want you to imagine an angry programmer at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's your audience. And you can say, I can't stand angry programmers at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you will need that man or woman when your game is released and there's just one more feature. Can you please add this? You're asking that person not to go home with their family tonight. You're asking that person to stay really late, to work extra hard. So you want to make sure that your design document is profoundly clear, always. The player may pick up that table. May? Under what circumstances? They either are or they're not going to. And be precise. Don't say some number. Give me a number. I'm 24. I don't care. They can change the number later. So always, the designer is always in service to the coder and needs to be as precise as possible and break things down into systems. That's what I code. And I also, I wrote 3, and I need to rewrite them because they're different now. I would do it differently now, more concise. Game design documentation has gone from what we used to call the Bible, this gigantic tome, to how succinct can we get it for weekly releases. And maybe just due to Silicon Valley neuroses, some games that John and I, when we're working on a game, he's working on a shooter right now, which he just announced, and the entire, you're looking at the design. Nothing is written down. Everything there is to know about that game is in our heads. In part because people break into things. If it's a high-profile project, they want to get in and look at stuff. So they have to figure out how to do a direct neural input into one of our heads to get it. And I would like to say that oh good, she's crazy too. No, it's Silicon Valley, and we actually already had 2 game designs stolen. So we're just neurotic and careful and crazy, whatever. But thanks for making me look crazy.
I'm Philip Lynch from Pixel Soup. Just wondering, in relation to the design document, the game design document, how much involvement does the coder have, percentage-wise, in the development of the game design document?
Well, it depends. Again, I think if there's other developers here, I think we'd all have, if we were forced to write down our answer on a piece of paper, all of our answers would be different. For me, even though it's my game and my vision and my design, I know that I'm relying on that lead coder to carry out that vision. And so I will always interview the lead coder. What level of design documentation would you like? What is your preference? What things drive you crazy? And then usually I'll have the document done a week or 2 before it goes into production. The lead coder takes a look over the document, notes up stuff that's not clear. The best lead coders are the ones who come and sit down with you and say, for instance, here's exactly what you want. What you want is going to take me a month. If I give you 90% of what you want, it's going to take me 2 weeks. And I will usually budge on that. 10% isn't worth 2 weeks worth of coder time. So usually there's quite a bit of input, and it depends too, it depends on whether or not that lead coder, like for instance, if John were the lead coder, John is also a designer, he's got tremendous input. And then there's also lead coders who are just brilliant coders and care far more about optimizing engines than they care about the next quest somebody's on. So it's also very dependent on the coder.
Got time for one more question.
Well, I should say that the coder, ultimately I can create the most ridiculous, and any designer left to their whim will create a world far more ridiculous than any schedule could handle. And so ultimately, the lead programmer, the lead artist, tech director, whoever's holding the purse string and the time, the clock, that limits your ideas as well. Usually in an early design phase, so we're all in the room.
Hugh, my family from DIT. What 3 characteristics do you look for when you're hiring a game designer?
And hiring a game designer? That's a good question. Me personally, I like to see people who play board games. Because that tells me board games are what game design looks like. Yay! That tells me that, the game designers, when you get to that level of fascination, that's down to the metal for game designers. You're just playing with mechanics then. And if you've made board games, I'm even more impressed. I don't care whether they're bad board games, it just tells me this is something that you do. Actually, instead of stealing his quote, I'll credit him. Ian Schreiber, when I originally hired him, he had this amazing line, and I don't remember the whole rest of the interview. But this amazing line he said in his interview was, I'm going to make games whether I'm paid to or not, so I might as well be paid to make them. I also look for game designers who can code, because game designers who can code tend to architect their systems so that they can be coded easily. So they don't dismiss ideas that actually might be easy to code, and they can also sometimes do scripting themselves. I guess overall, I also try to look for a pretty diverse group of people working on a game. Because I found just John and I working together, I didn't want a team that's all the same person, because all the same person will give me just all the same vision. So I like having a mix of people on a team. That's pretty important. I know that's three, but just ridiculous passion for games, sense of humor, fun people, that's really important. You know, you're going to be spending more time with people while you're making a game than you will in all likelihood spend with your partner. So they better, you either better marry him like I did, or you have to be very, very comfortable with those people. And that's what, but code, board games, that'll get my attention. Those two things will always get my attention.